UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Fanchise Fatigue. I'm your host, Brandon-Shea, and this is the little podcast on the United Federation of Podcast Network where we discuss films, sequels, and remakes. And joining me on this never-ending time-traveling adventure as we spiral out of control is my good friend, Zach Moore. How are you doing?
Doing good, Brandon. I can't wait to talk about this masterpiece of a film.
Awesome. I'm so happy that I convinced you to buy this movie on Blu-ray. Yeah. I regret nothing.
It's my own fault.
Excellent. And we have got a special guest joining us today, and I'm very excited. So I just wanted to say, hello, Max Hegel. It is nice to meet you.
Hello, Brandon. Hello, Zach. It's nice to meet you guys as well.
We've been preparing. We've been preparing for your arrival for 10 years.
Yeah. I was anticipating.
Sorry, we're off to a late start. I was stuck in traffic.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yes, lots of bad jokes that are going to be in this episode. Max, this is the first time we've recorded with you, and we're both pretty excited. So we've been listening to you on Commentary Trek Stars and Film Damage and whatnot for many years with Mike Schindler. So it's a pleasure to put a face to the name.
Yep. And it's usually this face. Sometimes the beard is smaller, but it's pretty much been this the whole time.
Okay, so first, before we start off with our trivia, Max, we're just going to ask a little bit about your history with the Terminator franchise itself. When did you come across it? You know, what does it mean to you and your movie fandom, that kind of thing?
Well, I came across it when the first movie was on home video, and I was at the house of boyfriend of my mother, and he had it and he was playing it, and I remember like being transfixed by the movie and just like asking a lot of questions like, what is this? What is it about? And my mother and her boyfriend both said, you should not be watching this. And I said, this is the only thing I ever want to watch. And I proceeded to acquire a copy of the movie, and I watched it numerous times. And then the sequel came out, and I was incredibly obsessed with Terminator 2, fanatically, and it was the only thing I talked about for a good month or so at school. And then, time passed, and eventually I kind of just, thought, hey, Terminator now exists in comic books, and that's okay. That's fine. Mm-hmm. And then they made Terminator 3. And, I mourned a lot of stuff that day. And humanity was one of them.
Humanity was one of them.
That was a dark time. And pretty much after that, my feeling has been Terminator now. I don't know what good it can hold, but it's certainly a fun environment in which to have conversations and arguments, especially
that's very apt. It's very apt,
especially when people try to pinpoint the worst movie in the series, and I would say very few people point it correctly at Terminator 3, but whatever.
That's awesome. So You're one of the people then that has actually started with the first one. So, like, basically, Zach and I both started with Terminator 2, right?
Yeah.
That was the first one that we saw. So it's kind of interesting that you knew of the original and had seen it prior to that. So that's pretty awesome.
I mean, it was the 80s, really. Like, the 80s were a time when, like, you saw a movie on home video, you saw it a couple more times, somebody steals your VHS copy of it, and you think about renting it at the video store because Blockbuster's barely a thing in your area at that point. It was a complicated time. It was a dark period. It was basically like exactly the future depicted post-Judgment Day. You watched Fires because they were just as good programming as what was on television at the time, until Alf started. But it was crazy. So, like, I saw it. I loved the movie. I didn't see it a ton of times. And then around the time DVD came out, I was able to watch them, the first two, a bajillion times, to the point of absurdity, where, like, I can go, like, watching Genisys, I'm like, that guy doesn't look exactly like the first guy. Yes. He's slightly younger and has a very slightly different accent. God, they really didn't even try.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this. Did you watch all of them again to prepare for this?
Yeah, let's go with prepare for this. It's not like it's more like I've always got something on in the background, and like around June or July or something, like it just sort of hit the rotation, and I was like, oh, I can put Terminator on, and I have all of the movies purchased on multiple platforms. Like, I've got all of them on Google. I've got all of them on iTunes. I've got all of them. I've got a good chunk of them for some reason on Microsoft Video. Like, I can just play them on any platform. So yeah, I just watched them for no real reason. But like, I did think, like, I should probably at some point remember the years that these things take place in, because, like, I'm like, was it 84 or 85? When did they go back in time to? Was it 84 or 85? I feel like it's 84, but I wasn't sure. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. So I did think about that.
And that gets especially confusing in this film. So,
well, it gets real confusing if you include the Sarah Connor Chronicles, because they, like, bump everything back 1 year for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that's interesting, because when I saw Genisys for the first time, before we get too far into it, like, I didn't know anything about it. All I had heard was all the bad reviews about how bad this movie was, and I had seen Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles, and I was surprised to see some elements that had, like, transferred from the TV show to this that we'll talk about during the discussion here. But for the users, if they do want to, the listeners, if they want to follow along, check out our Twitter page, because we retweeted from Max here. He had done some really interesting timeline graphs going through all the Terminator timelines. And I think that as we go through the discussion, Max and I are going to be a little bit on the same kind of page as to what our interpretations of the timeline are. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But before we do that, Zach, I'm guessing you got a little bit of trivia for us.
I do have a little bit of trivia for us, Brandon.
I got one for you.
What? Let's start off with you. What do you got?
That person who played Sarah, she's in Game of Thrones.
That's some great trivia there, Brandon.
Yeah.
You know the person who played Sarah in Sarah Connor Chronicles? She was also in Game of Thrones. So they Game of Thrones, the most disappointing thing about Season 8 is they didn't cast Linda Hamilton in any role. That's really what the most disappointing thing is. But
that's not the most disappointing thing about Season 8 of Game of Thrones.
So, getting into Terminator Genisys, as I call it, the title refers...
What? You're not going to do a Star Trek 3 reference?
No, I'm not.
I always I always go with Terminator Sega Genesis.
There you go. Yes. But see, I was always more of a Nintendo guy anyway, so we're already off to a bad start.
Well,
so Terminator Genisys, the SYS is a computer term referring to system. And of course, Genesis being, beginning, first book of the Bible, etc. So they combine those two terms because it's about the beginning of the system of Skynet. So there you go. I mean, it makes about as much sense as Salvation did as a title for the last film. There is a colon in this one. though. There's no colon in Salvation. There's a colon in this, so it's Terminator Genisys. So for all you title files at home. Now, Justin Lin was apparently the first choice to direct this, but he couldn't because of his commitment to Fast and Furious 6. And I think, based off what he did with Fast and Furious and Star Trek Beyond, which I love, I think he would have been a much better choice for this film, other than TV's Alan Taylor.
What else has this Alan Taylor guy done?
Game of Thrones?
He's done Game of Thrones. Yeah, I thought so. I thought I recognized the game from Game of Thrones.
He also did arguably the worst Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, Thor: The Dark World. So
didn't Kenneth Branagh do one?
he did Thor,
The first one.
the best Thor.
The best
Whoa.
Thor.
In my
Isn't
opinion.
that's so weird. I don't know why I'm talking about this now, but this guy does like Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm. Well, Thor is Shakespeare, Brandon.
Is it? I don't know. I haven't
Got
seen
Anthony
him. The only
Hopkins
thing
in
I've seen is so did Mission Impossible 2. That
Shakespeare.
doesn't make it good.
So, also, Ang Lee was in negotiations to direct Terminator Genisys, but a deal could not be reached, and he did not direct the film. To tie back in Terminator 3, he was also on the short list to do that, but he chose to do Hulk instead. And a couple other interesting names I saw on the short list to direct this are Denis Villeneuve, whose name I always mispronounce, but the guy from Blade Runner 2049, Prisoners, Arrival, that guy. So, and also friend of all franchises, Rian Johnson was on the short list to direct this. So, you know what? I'm not the biggest Last Jedi fan, but I would have been interested to see what he did with Terminator Genisys. I'll put it that way. So, Speaking of directors of the franchise, James Cameron infamously gave a video endorsement for this film. Many of you, if you're Terminator fans, you probably saw it. It's James Cameron, and he's sitting there talking about, I watched this movie, and I started to see things I recognize, and if you're a fan of the Terminator franchise, you're going to love this. And it was just a big deal, like James Cameron returns, and it was, kind of what they're doing now with Terminator Dark Fate, right? But he had this endorsement, and he acted like, I see this as the true Terminator 3. And, of course, it came out, and nobody liked it, and it bombed, and now James Cameron's like, I'm making Terminator Dark Fate, and I see this as the true Terminator 3. So I lost a lot of respect for James Cameron that day.
Oh.
Which day, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was that day. Okay.
Yeah, that was the day I saw Avatar for the first time. One of the two. They're tied for me. But moving on, we'll get to Avatar as a franchise when the sequel comes out, Brandon.
I want to know if that made Mike giddy, because he said watching the trailer, he gave him the chills when James Cameron's name came up on the trailer for Dark Fate. So I wonder if the same thing happened when Genisys.
You saw that video endorsement for, hey guys, pay me my royalties. So,
yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger did return for this film, and due to his age, they found a story reason, which, to be fair, I thought was a clever workaround, that he would be an old Terminator instead of trying to use CGI on him the whole film to make him younger. It was written into the screenplay that he would be an older Terminator, and wrapped in flesh, it would age normally. Therefore, he could be his late 60-year-old self. Now, he worked out for 6 months, about 3 hours a day before shooting, and he got his body weight and dimensions and muscle measurements to exactly the same dimensions he had during Terminator 3. So he really did.
Again?
Yeah, that's what it's.
Guy.
And he didn't have to go topless in this one. But hey, I give him credit. He does look great for his age in the film. I mean, puts us all to shame as a 60-something-year-old man. So impressive there. But also, we do see a young Arnold again. For the Terminator from the first film. Now, that is a body double. That is a bodybuilder named Brett Azar. He won the role because his body dimensions were most similar to Arnold's from 1984, and he was a big Arnold fan as well. So Arnold gave him some cigars and bodybuilding magazines on his first day shooting, so they had a nice bond there. And also, he was perfect at lip-syncing the lines from Arnold, and that was another reason to kind of put him over the top. The few lines that the original Arnold Terminator does say. And then, of course, they digitally replaced his face with Arnold's face in all the scenes. So there's some, and I'm not sure exactly, because the Terminator rights of this franchise are very complicated, but there were some legal reasons why they couldn't just reuse footage from the first film, which would seem the most obvious thing to do. So instead, they spent millions of dollars. Instead of just buying the rights to that footage, spent millions of dollars recreating a young Arnold in CGI.
Well, what would you rather have preferred? Would you rather have preferred something that's from 1984 that doesn't match with what else is going
Well,
on?
no, you shoot new stuff that matches the old stuff and use the old stuff. That's what you should do. That's my opinion, anyway. So,
Max?
I don't know. I think matching the nature of the film would be very difficult. You'd either have to like copy